And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence.
It was 1776 when the founders signed the writ of independence from the Brits. It was revolution.
Tonight's featured show is Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. Welcome to the Republic News Network for our live national broadcast. You may call me Kelby, and tonight I'm going to be acting as your moderator. The RNN, which stands for the Republic News Network, has been doing this radio show since 2010, and it's always been a friendly introduction for the people of the United States Corporation. Here we go. It's true. The United States is a federal corporation, and their exclusive jurisdiction is in the District of Columbia. The Republic government was simply a bunch of U.S. citizens that in law don't have access to the Bill of Rights, and they realized they wanted to be Americans as our founders and our law provided each and every one of us. See, we've been hard at work since 2008, and since 2010 we have successfully re-inhabited the original government vacated under Lincoln in 1861. I know, it's hard to understand. Don't worry. We are law-abiding, peaceful Americans and very pro-government, and we love our country. You can consider the Republic members are tired of the corruption that we see every day. See, we found in the law that there is two forms of government here on the land, and we did something about it. We are people. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters. We have families just like you. We simply found some truths, and now we're sharing these important truths with the rest of the world. So get ready to hear things that sound amazing, and get ready to understand that you too are about to be a part of history. We welcome each one of you to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel and your Republic if you so choose. But before we go into our broadcast tonight, please bow your head in prayer.
Yes, Lord, we want to thank you so much for the opportunity to just still be in a country where we can pray. We want to thank you for a shift in the entire structure of controls in this country, and we ask you, Lord, that this President Trump, Lord, that he actually does what he says. Lord, bless this call, bless the people on it, protect us all in moving forward and bringing this nation back into a Republican form of government. We pray this in your Son's name. Amen. Dan, I yield.
Thank you, Kelby, and it's great to be back. I had Debbie Boscalupi on as our guest host last week. She did a magnificent job, and I think we'll be hearing much more from Debbie in the coming weeks. We'll be making some announcements about her participation in a new program on the Republic News Network. She'll be doing her own show, and that will be coming up in the next month or so, and we will be talking about that as time goes on. Tonight, we have the great privilege of bringing back a good friend of mine, Jim Beers. Jim is a 30-year veteran of various, as a naval officer, a wildlife biologist, a congressional liaison with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and Jim was forced to resign when he exposed the misuse of the $40 to $60 million of the Pittman Robertson fund that were used to illegally introduce 15 breeding pairs of Canadian gray wolves to the Yellowstone Park ecosystem. And Jim was the brave whistleblower that exposed that fraud, and as a consequence of that, he paid dearly, and he was forced to resign his career with Fish and Wildlife Service, but he also prevailed and actually won a decision to reinstate his retirement and so forth. So in spite of the fact that they tried to intimidate him to shut up and stay shut up, he's been very, very vocal about some of these government programs that have just gotten completely out of control. Jim, welcome to the show. And first of all, I'd like to ask you about your trip to Washington, D.C. for the inauguration and your attendance at several of the presidential and other receptions at the inauguration.
Yeah, Dan, it's been a very interesting month for me. I was an early enthusiast for President Trump when he was running for president. I didn't give him any money or make a big deal out of it, but I wrote several articles in which I pointed out that he was probably the best bet on the horizon for rural Americans, and especially those being really hammered by the federal government through the various agencies. Anyway, when he did get elected, I saw that they kind of solicited applications for appointed positions and board appointments and that, and I thought, well, all the writing I do and everything, I should throw my hat in the ring for maybe an old guy like me. I'm 75 now, but an old guy like me with all the experience I've had in Washington with the agency and with the wildlife management area, and where for the last 15 years I've been speaking and writing articles about wildlife and issues and government issues, that I should make myself available. And I thought I put in a general application for any board or appointment with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the U.S. Trade Representative's Office, since I spent the last 6 years traveling back and forth to Europe as a member of a U.S. Trade Representative delegation. I thought maybe they could use me occasionally to come into Washington for a board meeting or be on a commission or something, some sort of a temporary thing, because I'm very happy. My wife and I are here retired in Minnesota. And lo and behold, about 3.5, 4 weeks, I guess about 3.5, 4 weeks ago, yeah, I got a copy of a letter that was sent to the transition team by a very influential former Assistant Secretary of Interior, nominating me for Director of Fish and Wildlife Service. So I wrote that man and thanked him, and suddenly I had two other pretty auspicious groups nominate me to the transition team for the position of Fish and Wildlife Service Director. And I mean, it was pretty flattering, and I thought, wow, that's if they think I can do that, and I think I can do it, to be honest with you, I think I could do it probably better than anybody, but we all think like that. I then sent in a formal application to the transition team for the position of Director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And lo and behold, about a week later, I had some people sending me copies of letters they sent in on my behalf, and I sent out resumes to them to forward to people that they could get to perhaps send in letters themselves once they saw my resume. So my resume is floating around out there everywhere, and all of my writing, about 16 to 1,700 articles right now, and copies of the talks that I gave. I almost always type out the talk that I give for an hour or so when I travel somewhere to property rights meetings or ranch meetings or hunter meetings or whatever. And so my position on a lot of positions and issues are out there, and it got kind of a life of its own. And about 2 weeks ago, just before the inauguration, I got a phone call from some supporters of then Congressman Zinke and now Secretary of the Interior Zinke. Well, these supporters said that they would like me to come into Washington and attend a couple of receptions they had there, and perhaps meet Congressman Zinke at that time because they thought that I would be a great director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I threw all my stuff in the back of my pickup truck and took off for Washington, and there's no place to stay in there that quick, so I stayed with my son out in Virginia, and I traveled into the two receptions, and they gave me a ticket to the inauguration, so I got to attend that. Even after living in Washington for over 30 years, I had never been to an inauguration, and it was very, very moving. It really was. The people I sat with and talked to and everything, it was very interesting. But anyhow, I got to meet Congressman Zinke. I got to meet the Senator Daines from Montana, and I met a lot of other politicians and political activists at these receptions. It was a few talks, and everybody was just introduced to everybody else, and we all sat and talked. It was just very, very nice. And Mr. Zinke, now Secretary Zinke, was encouraging and said, just he'd talk to me if he made secretary or whatever, and that was that. And I couldn't have expected any more. And now that he's been confirmed, I'm sort of got a lot of, actually several hundred people, including people in Europe, have written letters to the transition team and on my behalf, all over the United States, too, and I mean all over, from all four corners of Southern California, Washington State, Maine, Florida, and in between, saying that they thought I would make a great director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I'm sort of just sitting here waiting, and I don't talk about this as a way to say, oh gee, please support me. I'm very happy with what I do, and if the kind of skills and experience I have are what they need, I'd be delighted to do whatever I can to help President Trump. He calls it drain the swamp or whatever you want to reduce regulation, but to actually have I think, a very rural American oriented voice in Washington for ranchers and loggers and small communities everywhere, for local governments, and for returning state rights in the area of plant and animal management back to the states where it belongs, with the exception of the few species that we've got under treaties and the international commitments we may have here and there. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, like the Forest Service and like the Bureau of Land Management, has gone very far afield from the constitutional opinions, if you will, that they had originally, and they've dropped things like animal control and gotten rid of that over to agriculture and all of the nasty stuff, and they've created this sort of green image of being sort of a almost high priest or druids of the environment, much like EPA has done. And I think that needs to be looked at very carefully, and a lot of the regulations and director's orders and a lot of the plant and animal issues, from Florida panthers to grass carp in the Great Lakes to lead prohibitions, and those things need to be looked at with a hard eye and in line with not with really what you say is, well, President Trump wants this. The people that elected Trump, President Trump,
right?
The rural Americans, the things that they not only want but they need. They need to be taken away from this sort of being the sort of piñatas for these politicians to give things to the urban people for their votes, things that the urban people are not affected by. And basically, I'd like to see us move much more back towards where there was more local input and local control. And I mean local. I mean at the county level, even within the states, where the states protect the counties and the counties determine whether or not they want to have, trophy deer in the area or trophy elk, or whether they want to have grizzly bears, and they make those decisions, and the counties follow through on that. And to take on in the case of the Fish and Wildlife Service, this sort of perverse concept that's arisen, where they received an Endangered Species Act under the auspices of, we've got to save that eagle up in the air and that giraffe over there and these buffalo here. And to save a few is one thing, and that's really what the act was all about. But now they've gotten in the business of, well, we're going to put them back over here in Montana, we're going to put them down there in Arizona, and we're going to put them over here in North Carolina, and you don't have anything to say about it. And it's too bad if you lose your cattle. It's too bad if you lose your dogs. It's too bad if you're worried about your kids at the bus stop. The federal government has put them in here, and the state can't do anything about it. And that's really what I would love to get into. And I've got a good familiarity with regulations. And, when I've seen a lot of it the last couple of days in the paper, where just like under President Reagan and under Watt, and actually under both of the Bushes and even Clinton talked about doing it, and I think Obama gave it lip service, was the concept that we're going to reduce government regulation. Well, when you talk about regulations, the regulations are really the spawn of bad laws. And the bureaucrats take those laws when they're passed, and they actually help write them behind the scenes, and then they twist and mold them almost like Play-Doh to get things that will get them more people, more power, more grades, bigger bonuses, better retirements, everything else out of it. That's human nature. So to really trim the regulatory overburden, there needs to be some modifications at the very least, or limitations on many of the laws in place. And I think after talking about that and arguing about that in public meetings, often at great personal risk, about the things that we can do with some of those laws, I'd be delighted to have a few solicitors available to me to talk about that and propose things that would make those laws more in line with constitutional requirements and the perceptions of our founding fathers, and make rural America once again a very, very strong partner in making America great again. And I don't say that just because Trump does it, but making America economically strong and socially strong, and our families in the rural areas not making meth or having to wait a day and a half for a deputy sheriff to come by when some poor woman's ex-husband's trying to beat down her door. But a vibrant communities with good, strong local governments and sheriffs, and all manner of small businesses associated with the sustainable management and use of natural resources, both the renewable kind like timber and grazing, and that to the non-renewable kind like coal and oil and all of those things, in a way that's as harmonious as we can make it with fish and wildlife and recreation associated with them, and the whole thing of a fresh and vibrant environment. And that's the real. It's not just one thing or the other. It's all of those things together that got me pretty excited at my age. And actually, my kids and my wife are kind of happy. They say, "Well, that's really great that you've got that opportunity." So I'm just sitting here waiting, and we'll see what happens. There are a lot of people that have put in for that job. I only know a few of them, and I look back over the years, and I spent 32 years in the Fish and Wildlife Service, and during that time we changed directors a lot, and I got thinking about it. We never knew who the new director was or who was running for it until suddenly, a month or two after we got a new president, they said, "Oh, Joe Blow is now the director, or Nancy Blow is now the director," and you came to find out that that person had some connections here and there and knew this person or whatever politically.
Right.
And I got thinking, my competition for this is sort of a unique thing, probably for the government and for the people like your listeners that know me or read my things or have been to talks I've given. I'm in competition for that, and you can look at my resume. It's all over the place. You've heard me talk about this. You read what I said about that 6 years ago and what I said about this the other day, and you can say, I agree with that guy or I don't or whatever. And the opposite of that is what I've been reading the last couple of weeks about this new proposed, or I don't know if she's director yet, of the Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, a young lady who's a lawyer and who nobody can figure out really what she represents. She's worked in this field, but the truth is, and nobody likes to talk like this, but it's the truth, that people in this field of fish and wildlife management are either in a camp where they ultimately they believe in their heart that there should not be any use or active management of natural resources, that it should all be owned by the government and vacated and closed down to all access and use. They don't want any logging to go on. They don't want any grazing to go on. They don't want any hunting to go on. And they don't want anybody that's in there or going through there to disturb any animal. And you see them in these newspaper articles that when somebody is attacked by a grizzly bear or something and all mauled to death or horribly wounded, that, it's the person's fault. They shouldn't have been there, blah, blah, blah. The truth is it's our fault for putting grizzly bears there where that person was in a settled landscape. So you've got that kind of person, and then you've got the other person, like myself, as an example, that thinks we should manage all these animals and these plants so that they're beneficial to people in the broadest sense of the term, that they provide habitats and they provide recreation, they provide forage, they provide wood, and we can manage those in a sustainable way that can go on forever by the sustainable use and management of all these resources. And that can be done, and that's a big challenge. And it's a challenge you can measure. It's to say that we just save everything. We're going to get a new wilderness. We're going to declare a new critical habitat. We're going to put a new marine sanctuary here at the time that the fish and the wildlife and everything are going down. There's less and less fishing, less and less hunting. The challenge that you don't measure that other than to say, what a big success Jim Beers is. He just got a new wilderness for us. He just got a new refuge for us, a new forest over here for us. The challenge is that those properties, if the government has any control over them, should be managed in a way that sustains the local communities and benefits the nation in the broadest sense, not just the few people in rich enclaves in Massachusetts or Chicago or San Francisco, but the people that live in those areas, in those states. And in some states, like in California, it's like the United States, where the urban people with very progressive views pretty well have a lock on the government, and that's one issue. But you've got the other states down to the kind of Wyomings and Nebraskas, where the urban people don't have a big lock on the state government, and the state government can respond to the counties in a way that's very productive for the local communities. And getting the federal government out of their way is a big benefit to all of them. When people tell me that, you can't manage fish and wildlife by county, Mr. Beers, I look back I grew up in Illinois, and when I moved to Virginia, many years ago, and lived there and started to go deer hunting there, when you got a deer map, every county was pink or blue or chartreuse, about 30 different colors. And you looked at those colors in this county, you could only shoot a shotgun. This one, you could only shoot a buckshot in it, or this one, you could only shoot a slug in it. Over here, you could use rifles. These counties, you could use dogs. Those counties, you could not use dogs. And in this county, it's only a 2-week season, and then the county right next to it, it's a 2-month season. And this county, you could take all these different rules, and it was based on the local people's perception and desires about, we want a few big deer around here to shoot, or no, we just want plenty of deer so everybody can bring deer home, and there's always going to be deer here, and the state respected that and managed the deer in regards to those local people. If they had a bunch of soybean depredation from deer, the county could actually call in hunters from North Carolina with dogs and kill a whole lot of deer, and it was taken care of by hunters, and the state made money out of it to use for conservation and law enforcement and whatever. It was a great system. So when you think about that, and you think about grizzly bears and wolves and mountain lions and all these other things that people that live far away say, you should have lots of them over there. That's a wilderness out there. And we don't want them to kill any over here, so we'll just dump them all over there. I mean, it's crazy, but that's what the federal government sort of spawned in all of this, and I'd like to really take that on. So anyway, it's been a kind of an exciting time for me.
Yeah. Well, I can tell from your that you're pumped about this from your conversation, and quite frankly, Jim, you're one of the few people that I know that would put the respect for the rights of the individual, the rights of individual citizens and local governments and so forth before the interests of the collective. You really truly understand what a constitutional republic is, and that's exactly the sort of person that we need in those kind of regulatory positions. I'd like to get into something that came up the other day, and that is this article, and you sent it out. It was in the Wall Street Journal about the Todd Gazzino. Is that how it's pronounced?
Gaziano.
Yeah, Gaziano. Okay, and his participation in the Congressional Review Act, and how that act can allow the overturning of executive administrative regulations that have been killing rural America for over 50 years. Can you kind of explain, kind of flesh out what that act would provide and how that would allow us to get rid of a lot of these administrative regulations through congressional action?
Yeah, Mr. Gaziano is a lawyer, and he's a senior fellow at the Pacific Legal Foundation. He was at that Republican get-together they had about a week ago, where I was on TV that somebody had gotten in there with a hidden microphone and was taping things. And he gave a presentation at that meeting on the Congressional Review Act. And the Congressional Review Act has been around since 1992 or something. And it says that all new regulations have to be reviewed by Congress within 60 legislative days before they're introduced or made final. And that with all the regulations that have been going on since the Clinton days and then Bush the second and then with Obama, that so many of them never got really reviewed, or that they were submitted late and just looked at very cursorily and sent out and made final without, not only not reviewed, but just a little sort of a lick and a promise and not a good review. And he said that his reading of that act is that Congress can look at those batches of regulations that were not reviewed all the way back, and the ones that were not thoroughly reviewed in the time that it should have come, and that they can sort of repeal those regulations. And if they do that in repealing those regulations about the matter that they concern, there cannot be new regulations introduced on that matter, which means you do away with that area of regulation. Now, when we look at things like the Wilderness Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Animal Welfare Act, environmental, NEPA, the Environmental Protection Act, all of those, we look at those, we say, oh, it's the regulations, and I, like I mentioned a little earlier in the talk, regulations are a result of laws. They pass a law to protect endangered species, and they say that endangered species is this, that, and the other thing. Well, then the agencies get it, and they write the regulations that explain that. And in that explanation, and the laws are worded so that they can make that as broadly as they want to out of that. So they make these very burdensome regulations. And when people like you or I complain about it, they say, well, that's the regulation. That's what the law says. Well, the law really doesn't say that. And we've got these regulations the bureaucrats wrote, and we turn around to Congress and say, hey, can you change that law? Can you repeal the law? And they say, well, no, we can't repeal that. Why? Are you against endangered species? Well, no. Well, can you amend it? What, amend it? Amend the Wilderness Act? Why? This is an act that we got from the Vatican here. We can't touch that. Mm-hmm. And then you say, well, can we limit the act in some way? And they say, well, of course not. Nobody will let you touch any of those acts. So if that's going to be the case, then perhaps a really close look by some lawyers in the private sector of this Congressional Review Act and Mr. Graziano's presentation, at this Republican get-together, which I have not been able to find online yet other than this summary of the presentation and what he was saying, that there may be sort of a beacon of hope here to at least critically examine and do away with or change or somehow make bearable some of these regulations that have been passed in the last 20-some years. And I think it's pretty exciting, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh yeah, it provides an opportunity, but it's going to require a Congress with some guts. They've got to be willing to do a little extra work and really do their job, which is to protect the citizens of the United States against regulations that are unconstitutional. And that does require a little extra work, and it requires them to have enough guts to stand up against these groups.
Well, maybe we
Jim,
can give them a little shot in the arm too. If we look at it as, what if our lawyer for this particular kind of bad regulations looks into it and sees that these regulations were not reviewed under the Congressional Review Act or reviewed properly, and lodges a lawsuit that they're illegitimate regulations because they have insufficient or no review under the Congressional Review Act. That may cause the court to either force Congress to review them or to say, therefore, they are ineligible for enactment. That could be.
Right, and that is certainly a good possibility. At this point, we're going to take a very, very short break. Kelby, would you like to take over, and we'll return with Jim Beers in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Dan. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you, and we appreciate you coming on the show week in and week out. We hold these every Thursday at 6 p.m. Pacific. As you are hearing, it is absolutely a new truth of understanding what is really needing to happen in our country to change and implement things for the return of the power to the people and to the republic. So we do need to thank Mr. Happel and Mr. Beers for coming on the show every week in and week out, and putting these articles out to the body politic of people who really need to know the truth of what's going on. We also have a series of calls throughout our week, and we're an open book. You can visit us at republicfortheunitedstates.org. We encourage you to come to our Wednesday night Building the States phone call so that you too can understand how to build a body politic at the bottom up, municipality to even your local state. So we encourage you to come to these shows week in and week out. We'll look forward to seeing you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific. And Dan, I yield the floor back.
Okay, thank you, Kelby. Jim, I would like to use this opportunity to maybe talk about the way that we need to reduce the influence of environmental, non-governmental organizations, tax-exempt foundations, and the urban lobby that understands nothing about rural life and nothing about private property issues, and concern themselves in the property of others and allow the rural folks to literally die on the vine, and they don't realize that they're killing not only the rural property rights, but they're killing their own rights at the same time. Can you talk a little bit about ways that you see that we can reduce the influence by these groups?
That is the nub of the problem for all of these things. And when we talk about, should do with electoral college or whatever, I wrote an article a couple of months ago that said if you think the electoral college is not important and you live in rural America, you better think pretty carefully, because the big votes, the big concentrated votes, are all in those big cities. I said, imagine a plane that took off with the candidates and flew from Los Angeles to Chicago, to New York City, to Boston, and back to Los Angeles, and occasionally made a stop in St. Louis or in Seattle, and campaigned for president. Now, what do you think most presidents in both parties could offer those people that they'd really like, that wouldn't bother them at all? It's rural things. It's where I'm going to give you more wilderness. I'm going to save Mount so-and-so. We're going to have more endangered species money. We're going to have more restrictions on guns out there. We're going to have more restrictions on ammunition. And we're going to do all kinds of things out there in the rural area. We're going to buy more land for the government, and we're going to fund easements. And the people in the urban area where all those votes are, the majority of the votes, not just concentrated votes, but most of the votes, are there. And they're going to say, oh yeah, I'm all for that. I might go on a vacation out there one day, and I could hear a wolf howl, my kids and I would see a buffalo run across the road. Wouldn't that be swell? And they buy their votes with rural things. That's been going on for quite a while. It goes on in a lot of states like Illinois and Massachusetts, and particularly in places like California and Washington, where they offered the Seattle voters and the Los Angeles and San Francisco voters, they offer them things that we're going to save the mountain lions. We're going to have more land closed over there near Yosemite. We're going to stop all the timber cutting over there so nobody will have to look at it. We're going to get the farmers out of the delta down there. We're going to, all this stuff, the people in the city say, yeah, that sounds great. It's going to look like those pictures I used to see of what this place looked like 200 years ago out there. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And they don't realize, because it doesn't bother them, how destructive that is. So recognizing that we've got that problem anyway, one of the first things that I think we've got to do is we've got to return the election of U.S. senators to state legislatures. It's been my opinion for the last 10 years that one of the biggest problems we've got in this country is we've got U.S. senators that don't really represent states anymore. They represent national and international interests. And I say that because of this. When the legislature, whether you like it or not, elects the state senator or the U.S. senator, you still have a lot of say in rural parts of the state about that guy when he goes into Washington. When a McCain or a Feinstein or whoever, that kind of person, goes into Washington and they want to back up voting for more wilderness or putting wolves in places and everything, and they harm you don't have any recourse, because today, since they changed the way they get elected, they get their money for re-election from Indian tribes, from national and international lobby groups that give them lots of money for their purposes, and that money allows them to get the urban voters and certain key voters that they research within the state to vote for them and keep them in office. And that has been, in my experience, in many, many states, at the expense of the rural communities, that they have lost almost any representation in there. And it's not only because the Senate approves justices like we see right now, Supreme Court justices, but the big thing is that the U.S. Senate is supposed to oversee ratifying treaties. And as we see lately, Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, was trying to get a UN treaty that would, a legitimate treaty that would control small arms throughout the world. But really, if they brought that here and the Senate passed it and the President signed it, like could have happened with the last Senate and President, if that happened, they would then be challenging the Second Amendment and say, well, we've got a treaty now, and the Constitution says that a treaty supersedes the Constitution when it's duly ratified. So that kind of thing, when you take that principle and shift it over to endangered species, to scenic areas, to wilderness areas, to critical habitats, to UN biosphere agreements and everything, makes the U.S. Senator your front line of defense. And when the senator is a rogue senator for the rural people of the state, you've got no hope of doing anything with them if you live in the rural areas with few voters. But if he's appointed by the state Senate, you can go into the state capitol to the senators in the state capitol and say, listen here, Senator so-and-so, you're my senator here in the state. If you vote to put that Jim Beers back in there as senator, we're going to see that you never even get elected dog catcher again, because we're going to go after you, blah, 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 blah. You've got some handle on them. Now you've got no handle on them, because they can research the voters and get themselves put in, excuse me,
well,
get themselves in that job.
The 17th Amendment was, you're right, probably one of the worst things that we ever ratified, and in fact, I think there's quite a bit of evidence that says that it was never really legally ratified as an amendment to the Constitution. And the other thing is, and I'm going to correct you a little on this, Jim, is that it does say that treaties supersede the Constitution as long as they do not violate the intent of the original document. And that is the key, because so many of these things that we have ratified, they do violate the intent of the original Constitution, and therefore they really are unconstitutional, and they should be thrown out.
Well, we've got that. We've got much more ability to do that if those senators are appointed by the state legislature than we do with this popular vote. Especially the more you get to be a state like Oregon or California or Chicago or Illinois or Massachusetts or New York, where you've got an urban control there. And it tends to be the people that elect the senators, you know. And the senators cater to them in those votes. But I think that's a very, very big one right there. And other than that, you know, you need occasionally. I don't know if there are any out there. I don't say this to brag, but there aren't many former bureaucrats out there like myself that feel strongly about this. In fact, most don't, because you don't have any friends left within the bureaucracy, and that's who you worked with all these years. So you tend not to do that. Your family tends to think of your status in the community as related to your work for the government and honorable work and all of that. So, you know, people that know about this, and I don't mean just the senator thing, but that know about how to limit the government and how the government has gone rogue and how they do it, they tend to just walk away from it if they can when they're done. And they see somebody like me, even at funerals. I've had people walk away from me at funerals because they feel that strongly that they dislike me. And even running right now for director, I've had two different people tell me that when my name came up for someone to back for director of Fish and Wildlife Service, that there are people out there saying that, oh, he's been going to see a psychiatrist for years. You don't want to touch him. So, you know, I say this not for my own part. This is going on for anybody that is perceived as having any kind of a possible ability or commitment to do what we say we all want done. It's kind of hard to find, and to find not only a commitment but the knowledge of how to do it. So, you know, I'm pretty excited about doing this, and I mean, I can see just a little bit of this couple of weeks here, the cost of me going into Washington and getting around in there and getting back and forth and everything. You know, I don't have anybody helping me with that, but you can see where when these people run for these jobs or run for a political office, that there are quite a few expenses involved in that. And I'm just a little bit of short time in one trip. You know, it is what it is, but the people were real nice to me, and I'm delighted that I went in there and learned a lot. But you know, the way we've got to take that into account as we say, well, gee, we want old Fred over there to run, or that young fellow over there, Sam, or that young gal over there, Sally. You know, that's the kind of person we want in those jobs or to run for our offices. We've got to give them the wherewithal to do it. And I don't mean a lot of money, but, you know, give them the kind of backing that'll get them up there and,
you bet,
you know, get them in there to do the right thing. So there's a lot of issues that need solving.
I think you're right with that, Jim, and that actually ties right in with what I was going to ask you about, which is what's the best technique to counter the enormous financial resources of the radical environmentalists and the people that have all this money and all this power that they've developed over several generations. Yeah. What's the best way to counter that? And I think you just touched on that. We need to start supporting the people that we believe in and doing it in a way that has real meaning. Am I right about that?
You're correct, and they do have a lot of money, but they're spending it. They give themselves big salaries. The recent director of the Fish and Wildlife Service just went over to be the director of Zoos and Aquariums National or something. The one before him went to head up the Defenders of Wildlife, and they take people with them, and everybody's getting jobs out there like that. And you look at that and you say, just without the money part of it, you say, well, they're all friends. They all get together and they all continue to work, and you just can't beat them. It's just I like to think of the Soviet Union for years when I was growing up, and then as a young man. I mean, it was just like this monolithic government, a big challenge to the West, and it was going to make the whole West communist if we didn't stand up to them, and we had to have as many bombs as they had. We went through all this, and lo and behold, when suddenly their bet was called, kind of with Reagan, and I'm not saying this to brag on Reagan, but all of a sudden they just collapsed. And if anybody would have ever said to you 20 years before that, oh, don't worry about the Soviet Union, that's going to collapse. There's nothing there. It's like one of them saloons in a Western movie where it's all, tumbleweeds behind it. And you wouldn't have believed it. And I think a lot of this stuff that it's built on for the Defenders of Wildlife and the Animal Welfare Institute and the Natural Resources Defense Council is a false philosophy. And it's built on lies. It's built on misperceptions from universities and that. And as we see people harmed physically by wolves and grizzly bears, and as we see the fires get worse from all of the non-management of the timber out there in these larger areas, and we see it's no longer deniable what the impact of the federal government is on local governments and state governments, that we're going to look at that and say that this is crazy. And they're going to say, well, no, listen to us. And people are going to say, we listened to you and look where we got. And I think we need to have good men and good universities and good women all ready to step in when this all starts to fall apart. I really believe that. And I think it gives me a consolation to consider that and how to go about getting to that point.
Well, I think that actually a perfect example of that is the Trump revolution. The fact that somebody who all the media, and I mean literally all of the mainstream media, was saying it would be impossible for him to get elected, and Hillary couldn't lose, and on and on and on and on. All the pundits were there and said that there wasn't a prayer that Donald Trump could get elected, but yet the rank and file, the middle class of the United States, came out in force and said, we're not going to listen to your lies anymore, and we understand that we have a problem and we really want to change it. And I was astounded, and I think you probably were too, by the magnitude of that movement.
Yep, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's absolutely something. Well, I want to get into something before we run out of time here, but it was on our title and on our descriptor of what it takes to staff a cabinet agency, the politics behind the appointment process, and how that appointment process has worked in the past, and how you see that changing under the Trump administration. Can you kind of get into the weeds?
I don't know that the mechanics of what's going on is changing. In other words, I hear here, there, and everywhere about various reasons why so and so got appointed as secretary, and if you hear things like so and so, one of these guys running for director is a good friend of one of Donald Trump's kids, sons, and they do things together in that. And another fellow is a big environmental consultant from California, and that he's got connections through the senator, I think probably Feinstein or somebody, of all things, but back into Washington, and he's there. And there's another fellow from Arizona, and when you think about it, when say Dan Happel got elected president, and I think it's fair to say that President Trump is not focused on rural American items like we're talking about here, but that recognized his sons are. They seem to be concerned about hunting and open available habitats and just America's outdoor heritage sort of thing. So you've got their interest. They say, well, I think we ought to get this kind of a person or whatever, and they've all got a different view of the elephant, kind of like the old thing when we were kids about the blind men grabbing the elephant, and one thought it was a snake because he had the tail, another thought he was a wall because he was touching the ribs, and another one thought he was a post because he was touching a leg and that. But when you and I talk about this, there aren't many people in any administration coming in who are focused on these kind of things. They don't get elected by the United States electorate because they're really big on the things we've just been talking about here for the last 50 minutes. So we've got to think about being in sort of the crease that comes along with what they're into. And right now, they want to drain the swamp, and they want to recover the economy, and we should think of our issues in those terms, and look around for people that you respect and want to advance your agenda politically, and ask them to think about Dan Happel. He's a guy we ought to talk to, and we ought to put him forward to that. He'd be a great director for the Bureau of Land Management. He'd be a wonderful assistant secretary for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, because he understands what the Park Service does and what the Fish and Wildlife Service does. That kind of thing. Or you understand about the Forest Service. You've been dealing with those idiot Forest Service supervisors for the last 20 years, and you're the only one we know that can make them back down occasionally. That kind of thing, we want that kind of person to be put forward and talked into, look, maybe you're going to have to spend the next 2, 3, 4 years in Washington if you get it, but, and then you got to look around and you say, well, let's talk to President Trump's son, or let's talk to Congressman Tom Reed, who's the head of the transition team, or let's go talk to the head of the Property Rights Association to make a big push, a big publicity push for him for that position. That's the kind of thing you need to get some attention and to get them thinking. I would hope that in my case, and I mean, this is, again, I'm not looking for any help here. In my case, they say, we really want to do something with that Fish and Wildlife Service because they've got a lot of employees in there that are challenging us like the Park Service does on everything from climate change to, the protection of all animals at the expense of human beings everywhere. And we really want to do something about that. Well, we got this guy that's a environmental consultant. We got this crazy man Beers over here. That's he's been a whistleblower and he's always complaining about things and recommending this, that, and he's too much off to this, or they got a range of people to look at in the context of what they're doing. Well, we've got this kind of guy as Secretary of the Interior, and we're going to get that kind of a gal over here as an assistant secretary, and we want this to be something that is not too disturbed, or all of those things. Every time there's a change in administration go on. And the truth is, I think Donald Trump's administration, as far as I can tell, has been much more open and considerate of a range of people. And I'm delighted about it. And whatever happens, I'm happy with it, and I'm delighted that I could offer myself. And whoever they put in there, I wish them Godspeed. So we want a wide range of people in there. We want to all get along and work together. We don't want to be cutting each other's throat. I don't want to be elbowing you out of the way because Ducks Unlimited gave you their endorsement and not me, or you don't like me because the NRA is behind me, and it looks like that's really got a lot to say in the new Trump administration, that kind of thing. We all got to kind of get along and stroke together like a bunch of Vikings heading for Ireland or something. So I guess
and the thing that happens with so many of these things, Jim, and you kind of alluded to it, is that they mischaracterize the people that are concerned about private property and concerned about rural America as a bunch of wackos, and that we're out of the mainstream, when in fact what we're talking about is exactly what our Constitution says that our system is supposed to be based on, and that is the rights of the individual and local bottom-up control of government, and that way the local people can determine the use of the land in their state, the resources in their state, and in their counties. And it was always intended to be that way, but somehow over the last 50 years, we've lost sight of that, and they've characterized now what used to be mainstream as being really off the wall and really negative, and what is the furthest thing from being constitutional, which is this collectivist nonsense, as being, what really is good for America.
Dan, I just read 2 short books that were sent to me by the author, Bill Howell, on resolving contrariety in the property clause of the Constitution and the property clause factor in the constitutional equation that speak quite a bit about that and helped me a lot to understand that. I'd highly recommend them. I mean, I didn't get these to make plugs for them, but I did just finish reading them recently, and I got a lot of things answered about that property clause and property rights in these 2 little short books. Bill Howell, he's a Utah fellow, and I'm sure you could probably find one of these books somewhere. They're real small. They're just little. I don't know how many pages here. Yeah, about 40 pages long. And about
what are the names of the 2 books? Do you have that with?
The first one is Resolving Contrariety in Judicial Interpretation of the Property Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And the second one is Considering the Property Clause Factor in the Constitutional Equation. And they're written by Mr. Bill Howell, and he really talks about the public lands and the states' rights and how the states were formed a little bit differently back east than they were out west, and why that took place and what needs to be done about it. It was very, very good explanations of this, and I'd highly recommend it to anybody that's interested in the topic.
Would you please send me the information on those books and how I can contact the author, and I will make sure that we put that on our website.
Yeah, I suppose he's on the internet. He actually sent me an email and offered to send me these 2 books, which he did. And I thanked him, and I read them, and they were very, very good explanations. Very good. Well written. Bill Howell, Howell.
If you would forward that information to me, then I will contact him.
Good.
And we will see if we can get those 2 publications put on our website.
Okay, in fact, I think I still have the email that he wrote me offering to send them to me, and I'll, get that information there. Great.
Well, that'd be great.
That's good.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, as always, it's been a terrific discussion, and I really appreciate your insight into these federal agencies and how the process is. I described it in our description of the radio program as watching government sausage being made.
Yep.
You watch it, you see how it's done. It pretty much kills your appetite. But thank goodness you're someone who is at a point in his life where you don't really care how the sausage is made. You just want to make sure that you can make a difference. And I want to wish you the very best success, and hope that your honesty, your knowledge, and your commitment to the truth and love of our great constitutional republic is put to good use by the Trump administration. Let's hope that happens, and I would suggest that to all of our listeners that if you in any way feel that you can contribute to help Jim in his seeking of an appointment to one of these seats, be it through email, through contacting your congressman or your senators, please do that, because knowing Jim as well as I do, and we've known each other now for some years. I met you over the wolf issue. You worked with me when I was a county commissioner, to try to let people know what was going on with the rewilding of Montana and many of the other western states. And Jim, you're one of the few people that I know that always stand and does the right thing no matter what, and I really applaud you for that. Is there anything that you would like to tell our listeners, just kind of as a last thought on what's happening? And
no, I'd like to thank them for the interest they've got in your show and this topic, and for listening, and God bless them, and God bless America.
Okay, well, Jim, thank you very much for that. And if our listeners would please go to our website, you will find information on several of Jim's programs, including a short video that he put on about the demise of conservatism and some other things. And please join us again next week for another program in Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. And we will continue to pray for you, Jim, and let's hope that you do accomplish what you want to, and you are appointed to a leadership role at U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So with that, Kelby, I'll turn the program over to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes this week's show with Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. God bless. Good night. We'll see you next Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific.